How far would you go to figure out what happened to a loved one who suddenly vanished? What if digging up clues unearthed truths you wish had stayed buried? What if all that digging just muddies up the whole picture? And what if your loved one just happened to disappear on the same day and in the same exact location that thousands of other innocent people lost their lives in a truly horrific event? Welcome to Strange and Unexplained with me, Daisy Egan. I'm a New Yorker who will never forget the intensity of that day and who, like most of us, in the event of a terrible emergency, immediately just wants to locate my loved ones and make sure they are okay. A lot of people lost loved ones on September 11th, 2001. The September 11th memorial names nearly 3,000 people, and still, 23 years later, more than 1,000 victims remain unidentified. But even those families who have not been able to claim their deceased from the aftermath of the attack know with relative certainty that their loved one was in one of the two towers that were struck that day. They worked there or had a meeting there. But one woman who had no reason to be in the towers seemingly vanished in the midst of this unspeakable tragedy. Was she a casualty of the attacks? Was her death wholly unrelated? Did she use the chaos to just slip away from her life? Anyone who was an adult on 9/11/2001 can tell you where they were when the two planes hit the World Trade Center. The event brought our nation to a screeching halt as people nationwide watched in horror as the towers, once the tallest buildings in the world, came crashing down in a cataclysm of smoke, ash, and dust. And while people all over the world witnessed this heartbreaking disaster, seeing people hold hands and jump to their death rather than be consumed by the flames or crushed, New Yorkers gaped at the event from their own terrifying vantage points. I had a friend who was a pilot who lived in Midtown and heard the first plane go by overhead, way too low and going in the wrong direction. He watched as the plane struck the first tower, completely frozen with terror. People scrambled to call their loved ones. The phone lines crashed. Normally standoffish New Yorkers forged new relationships as they spent hour upon hour trying to travel a few miles to get home. The Brooklyn Bridge was packed with pedestrians. People cried on the street as the dust of the fallen buildings settled in their hair and in their lungs, coating anything stationary in a fine gray powder, like dirty snow. People sat on curbs, unsure of what to do. The sky was a terrible smoke signal to the world, while the streets were littered with the detritus of hundreds of floors of office buildings. There was no warning. As far as any average person knew, up until the moment it happened, we were blissfully unaware of how the world was about to change. September 10th, 2001 in Lower Manhattan was like any other day. Late summer clung to the city as it continued through the heat and humidity to conduct its business. The financial district hosted its usual brand of old-school investment bankers and khaki-clad tech bros, intermingled with the residents of the area who represented all walks of life. And, incidentally, myself and a friend who'd chosen a restaurant mere blocks from the World Trade Center itself. It was a neighborhood I almost never went to, one I thought that was devoid of character. But this restaurant, my friend assured me, was worth the visit to the financial district. The area around Wall Street churned with Manhattanites and one young woman who was enjoying her day off. 31-year-old Sneha Philip, a physician who, up until recently, had been in residency at Cabrini Medical Center about 3 miles uptown from where she lived in Battery Park, spent the morning of September 10th hanging out with her kittens, Figa and Callie, and cleaning the apartment she shared with her husband, Ron Lieberman. She repotted some orchids and had a long chat with her mother over instant messaging. For those of you tadpoles in the audience, instant messaging was like direct messaging or texting, except you had to be tethered to your desktop to do it. This was pre-smartphone days. No one was really texting. And even if they were, Sneha didn't have a cell phone. In this series of IMs with her mother, Sneha mentioned her plans for the day, including some shopping at Century 21, a lower Manhattan mecca of discount fashion, and possibly visiting Windows on the World, a popular and swanky dinner and drinks destination on the 106th and 107th floors of the North Tower of the World Trade Center that offered an unparalleled view of New York. Sneha said goodbye to her mother and left to run her errands. Then, sometime after 6 p.m., Sneha vanished. We can now look at the 24 hours before September 11th as the calm before the storm. We had no idea as we went about our lives that day what kind of chaos and misery would ensue. But even during that relatively calm time when things were still normal, Sneha Philip somehow dropped off the grid. Sneha never returned home to the apartment she'd tidied that morning. She never shared her shopping haul with her husband or IM'd her mother to tell her about the shoes she had bought. Sneha never visited Windows on the World or any other restaurant that anyone can recall. When Sneha's husband of 1.5 years, Ron Lieberman, came home from work that Monday night, it was late. Actually, it was technically Tuesday morning. Ron worked as an emergency room intern and was at the hospital at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx until midnight. Likely exhausted from the long day, he came home to an empty apartment, but wasn't too worried. He just figured Sneha was still out at one of her regular haunts. Later, Ron would tell investigators that this was something she did sometimes, and while he always preferred that she call, she often didn't. He figured she'd be back soon enough, so he went off to bed, setting his alarm so he could leave for work at 6:30 a.m. Side note, next time you go to the ER, try not to think about the fact that the person trying to save your life is likely operating on very little sleep. Everything is fine. When Ron woke up at the crack of dawn, Sneha still wasn't back. But Ron still wasn't worried. Mostly he was kind of annoyed. According to an article in New York Magazine from 2006 by Mark Fass, Ron assumed Sneha had, quote, spent the night at a news place a few blocks away or ended up in the West Village with her brother John. She did that sometimes. Resolving to talk to Sneha once more about her habit of staying out all night without checking in, he sleepily made his way to the Bowling Green subway station where he caught an Uptown 5 train in time for his 8 a.m. meeting at Jacobi in the Bronx, end quote. I'll bet he was sleepy. Sheesh. After his meeting, Ron, like so many other New Yorkers, realized something was wrong when he saw people at work huddled around a TV where they were watching the nightmare that was unfolding less than 20 miles away on the southern tip of Manhattan. I don't need to go into detail here, right? We all have those images seared into our heads, yes? Good. Moving on. Now, Ron got worried. Strangers, Ritual, my #1 sponsor for everything #2, is back. Listen, I live with 2 people who don't always appreciate my sensitive digestive system. I don't always appreciate theirs either. But you don't need to live with anyone to not appreciate your own sensitive digestive system. No one wants to deal with gas, bloating, and diarrhea. Even if you like the smell of your own farts, I don't know anyone who likes having stomach cramping and/or spooky dookies. Do you? With Ritual and Symbiotic, my whole family can breathe a little easier. But it's not just about your gut. The daily 3-in-1 little minty pill that doesn't require refrigeration helps support healthy and happy guts with pre, pro, and postbiotics that support a healthy gut microbiome. And I'm sure you heard that research is showing that a key to mental health is a healthy gut microbiome. Listen, I'm no scientist, so I can't tell you how or why our gut health impacts our mental health, but that's what science is finding. And didn't we all learn in preschool that all of our parts are connected? What I can tell you is the probiotics in Ritual contain live microorganisms, the kind that make up a flourishing microbiome. The prebiotics contain the nutrients those microorganisms need, And the postbiotics are natural byproducts that support the gut barrier. Plus, the pills are made to survive the inhospitable environment of your upper GI tract, so the medicine is delivered down to your gut where it can do its work. Also, all of Ritual's products are vegan, GMO-free, and tested for heavy metals and common allergens. And you know I love that. And because it doesn't need to be refrigerated, you can keep yours on your bedside table, medicine cabinet, or your purse. Or be like me and keep them on your desk with all your other daily pills so you'll remember to take it every day. So get your gut going. Support a balanced gut microbiome with Ritual's Symbiotic Plus. Get 25% off your first month at ritual.com/strange. That's 25% off at ritual.com/strange. Happy squatting! Ron and Sneha live just 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. Even if Sneha hadn't stayed out all night, it would have been a concerning situation. But having not seen or spoken to Sneha in 24 hours made the whole thing feel very urgent. Ron called Sneha at home and didn't get through. After the towers fell, many people had no cell service and landlines were tied up. Writer Marguerite Reardon described the chaos in a 2011 article on CBSNews.com. Quote, "For hours, family members and co-workers frantically tried to contact people they knew in Lower Manhattan. The network failure could partially be pinned on infrastructure damage. Cell phone towers were destroyed in the attacks, along with switching equipment used for landline phones. But another cause of the problem was the huge surge in traffic from people trying to find loved ones or letting others know they were okay." End quote. I had a cell phone in 2001. It was a Motorola StarTAC. It did one thing: make and receive phone calls. Expensive phone calls. Every time it rang, my cell phone bill went up. I can't imagine what I was doing in 2001 that called for a cell phone. I certainly wasn't a doctor at a hospital. It was also a simpler time when you didn't need to be reached at every minute of every day, no matter what. We used to be able to say things like, "I have to check my service." I still had a landline and answering machine in 2001, and I can attest the lines were definitely down. After the first plane hit, my boyfriend at the time was able to get through to tell me what was going on, but by the time I tried calling my family, all the lines were down. The few lucky souls who did have cell service would share their phones with all the other folks around them trying to get a hold of their families and friends. Ron, though, after leaving numerous messages on their home answering machine, did manage to get through to Sneha's mother. She hadn't heard from Sneha either. She called Sneha's brother, who also had not heard from her. It was starting to dawn on Ron that nobody had spoken to or seen Sneha since the previous morning. Now, he started to panic. Ron didn't think Sneha had been in either of the towers. Why would she be? But what could have happened to her? Imagining the worst, he left work around 3 p.m. and made the journey back to the neighborhood that was now ground zero, both for the attacks and for his wife's disappearance. Getting home to Battery Park from the Bronx was a nightmare. Even under the best of circumstances, that trek is a pain in the ass. But after the towers fell, everything in the city ground to a halt. No one knew if or when or where another attack might happen. Ron hitched a ride out of Jacoby toward downtown in an ambulance. That ride, which on a good day should take an hour or so, that day took 6 hours. But when he got within blocks of his apartment, he was stopped by NYPD. The whole area had been cordoned off. Anyone wanting to get past the barrier needed some kind of proof that they belonged down there. So if you happened to leave that morning without ID, it was going to be a struggle to get home. It's possible that in the first hours after the attacks, they weren't even letting people with ID past. At first, Ron couldn't get in, but as he was still wearing his scrubs, he finally managed to use his medical credentials to talk his way past the security barrier. When he finally entered his apartment, he found the window open and a house full of soot. He could make out the tracks of his cats, Viga and Callie, in the layer of soot, but there was no recent sign of Sneha. Ron was stumped. After Sneha left home on September 10th, what happened? Where did she go when she was done shopping? It was as if the city had just swallowed her whole before imploding. According to FAS and New York Magazine, quote, more than 9,000 people were reported missing on September 11th, though the NYPD quickly whittled down the list. Officials discovered names that had been listed more than once, people called to say they had heard from missing loved ones, investigators uncovered numerous cases of fraud, end quote. So it isn't hard to imagine that when Sneha's family were at their most desperate, the NYPD couldn't have been too terribly responsive. It was literally the worst possible time to lose someone. With the city in utter chaos, Ron took matters into his own hands. He made photocopies of his wife's picture and walked the streets with them. On September 12th, when Sneha had been missing for nearly 48 hours, he went to the hastily assembled 9/11 Help Center at the Lexington Avenue Armory to drop off some flyers. I cannot overstate how many flyers lined every available wall space in New York City in the days, weeks, and months after the attacks. Any construction site walling was absolutely plastered with missing person flyers. They were everywhere. A couple of weeks after the attack, I had an audition for some fakakta musical, and the walk to the audition site was harrowing because everywhere you looked, there were the faces of missing loved ones staring back at you. I must have looked upset when I walked into the audition because they asked me if I was okay, and what was I gonna say? No, our city was just attacked and we lost thousands, the rubble is still smoldering, people are still digging through, finding pieces of body, but sure, let me just sing something from Mamma Mia, that sounds appropriate. Anyway, Mark Fass of New York Magazine recalls, quote, when Ron saw the television cameras, he thought he might be able to get Sneha's picture out all over the country. He hoped someone would recognize her and provide clues about her disappearance. But when reporters learned that Sneha had not been heard from since the 10th, they lost interest. They wanted real 9/11 stories. Though Ron still did not believe his wife had been in the towers, he was desperate. He called Sneha's brother and suggested he come down to talk with reporters, leaving out a few details, end quote. Sneha's brother John told a story of Sneha's final moments live on WABC. He spoke directly to the camera, saying, quote, I was on the phone with her, and she told me she couldn't leave because people were hurt. She said, I have to help this person, and that's the last thing I heard from her, end quote. This was a complete fabrication. In fact, Sneha and her brother had been fighting for weeks. He hadn't heard from her in all that time. But desperate times call for desperate measures. If I were in a similar circumstance, heaven forbid stranger, then I would probably do whatever I could to get my person back. And hey, it worked. The news aired an image of the flyer, getting it in front of its viewership, which was a whole lot more than Ron could have managed on foot. But sadly, no leads or witnesses emerged. But, undeterred, Ron once again took matters into his own hands. He did some minor sleuthing to determine Sneha's movements the Monday afternoon before she went missing. He got a call from a shoe department sales clerk who recognized Sneha from his flyers as a regular Century 21 shopper. She claimed Sneha was there on the 10th, as she said she would be, and remembered that she was with a friend. Fass tells us in New York Magazine that the clerk described the friend as, quote, small, in her early 30s, dark-skinned, possibly Indian. The shoe department did not use security cameras, but after spending 3 weeks alone in a windowless room at Century 21's offices reviewing videotape, Ron discovered a coat department video that captured Sneha browsing alone. Sneha's mystery friend, if she existed, was never found, end quote. So Ron had a dead lead. Who was this mystery friend? Why was she never found or questioned? Had the sales clerk mistaken some random woman as Sneha's companion? The story about Sneha telling her brother she had to run into the fray to help was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it got them attention from the media. On the other hand, though, police were pretty sure if she'd been at the site of the attacks, she probably died and her body would either be found or it wouldn't, like everyone else who died there that day. Claiming she'd been at the scene meant police weren't going to chase any other clues. And you know me, stranger, I'm no cop apologist. Copologist? And normally I would have something to say about lackluster police work here, but New York City's finest really did have their hands full in the days after the attacks. One missing person was a drop in the bucket. Fast quotes Ron in New York Magazine saying, quote, "Maybe if I didn't do it, maybe it would have gone another way. It became a hero story." End quote. The truth is, the NYPD were overwhelmed. So, as he was unable to rely on the police to search for Sneha, Ron hired a private investigator. Strangers, I get lots of complaints about how woke I am, but I almost never get complaints about my grammar. That's because I use Grammarly. Grammarly helps keep my scripts clean and error-free. Unless, of course, I'm intentionally making an error for comedy purposes, which I also get complaints about, by the way. Listen, there is no sense of humor checker, but with Grammarly, you can get your grammar checked in real time, and then you can decide if you want to be correct or not. But you don't have to write scripts to get top-notch grammar help from Grammarly. Most of us need to write almost every day, whether it's emails or social media posts. Heck, some of you write books. Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites, so whatever you write, Grammarly can help make it better. Maybe you have an annoying boss who constantly bugs you via email. Grammarly will help you not send them snarky messages that will definitely get you fired. Instead, your boss will never know how much you hate them unless you decide to tell them. And when you do, Grammarly will still make sure you say it in a way that won't land you in court. Grammarly is also customizable by project and helps you write based on your audience and goals. So let's say you're writing a grant to open a community center. Grammarly can help with that. And then, once you've gotten your grant and you need extra funds, Grammarly can help you write a fabulous email to potential investors. Then, once you have all your funds, Grammarly can help you write the perfect newsletter to let the community know about all the great things your community center has to offer. From start to finish, Grammarly's got your back. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done. Private investigator Ken Gallant, a former FBI special operations agent, took Sneha's case and began by talking to her friends, coworkers, and family, and by visiting her favorite places. He showed her photo to anyone who would look and tried to find any evidence or account of her running to or from the scene of the falling buildings on the 11th. He asked around to see if anyone remembered a woman in distress, possibly being kidnapped or attacked on the 10th. And of course, strangers, he fell back on that bastion of great investigatory work, a psychic. He had the family fly someone in from Pennsylvania. I guess all the good New York City psychics were busy with 9/11 too. There's not a lot of useful information on what the psychic had to offer, but whatever it was, it obviously didn't lead anywhere. With no help there, insert shocked emoji, Gallant had to consider the possibility that Sneha disappeared of her own accord. But Sneha had left her glasses, passport, driver's license, and most of her credit cards at home. So the idea that she intentionally disappeared seemed very unlikely. It's not like she drained her accounts the day before. His investigation did uncover one intriguing piece of evidence, though. According to New York Magazine, quote, "The most tantalizing clue came from the apartment building's security camera, a videotape of a woman who resembled Sneha in the lobby just before the first plane struck the Trade Center. Because of the angle of the sun, the image is too bleached out for Ron to be sure. But on the tape, a woman who in silhouette looks very much like Sneha, a similar haircut, similar mannerisms, wearing a dress like the one Sneha wore the afternoon before, enters the building. She stands near the elevator, waits a minute or two, then turns around and leaves." End quote. Could this have been Sneha coming home after her night out, hearing the first plane hit and going to see what was happening? The footage was never released, so I don't know what her body language said. Did she seem startled by something? Was she carrying any shopping bags? Still, intriguing though it was, this clue amounted to another dead end. I don't know if they tried figuring out if there was another resident in the building to whom that elusive, sun-drenched silhouette might have belonged. But, stranger, where would she have been all night? It's not like the bars stay open all night, and even if they did, or she had hung out at a diner all night, someone would have seen her and recognized her from the flyers. If she'd stayed at a hotel, surely one of the staff would have interacted with her. If she did go home with someone she'd met at a bar, or even someone she might have been seeing on the side, why didn't that person ever come forward? At some point, I would imagine, the scandal of it all would be outweighed by the relief in having some kind of answer. Unless, of course, I suppose that person had something to do with her disappearance, which seems unlikely, but weirder things have happened. And if that is the case, there could be someone still walking around who knows what happened to Sneha. Ron and Gallant, who had both believed right along that Sneha had met with foul play, started to wonder if they had been barking up the wrong tree all along, and they both began to accept the Occam's razor version of things. Fass quotes Ron as saying, quote, "These kinds of crimes don't happen in Lower Manhattan, that somebody goes missing from a homicide and they don't find the body. Killers are usually stupid. They leave clues. A body will come up. Sneha just vanished. Vanished, 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 with no trace. The only thing that makes sense is that she burned in the World Trade Center." End quote. Once Ron came to this conclusion, it was time to put the investigation to bed. It was time to get to the work of grieving. Maybe the story Ron and Sneha's brother John had told the news about Sneha hadn't been so far from the truth after all. Maybe she had responded to the events of September 11th by trying to help those who were injured and had been killed in the process. Ron and Sneha's family allowed this narrative to blossom, and soon her name, along with thousands of others, was etched on the 9/11 memorial. Finally, the family had some closure. They were able to mourn. They held a memorial service. Ron even filed a claim with the Victim Compensation Fund. What the family didn't know was that for some reason, even though the police had assumed Sneha perished in the 9/11 attacks, they had also finally begun to look into her case. And what they found was a very different version of Sneha than the altruistic young doctor who died helping people. It turns out Sneha had a record, and it seems things in the months leading up to her vanishing had been, well, dicey. Sneha had been working at Cabrini Medical Center up until a few months ahead of her disappearance, but she'd been informed in the spring that her contract would not be renewed. That is fancy corporate talk for she was fired. The director cited tardiness and alcohol-related issues as the reasons he let her go. Maybe Sneha was reeling from this news and was having a personal crisis. On September 10th, Sneha appeared in court to plead not guilty to filing a false complaint of sexual assault by a coworker for which she had already spent a night in jail. According to a piece in The Independent, quote, "On the morning of her disappearance, she made an appearance in court to plead not guilty, and police records state that she and Ron had a big fight there that ended with Sneha storming off." End quote. Of course, these details about Sneha don't really tell us anything about whether she did or did not die in the 9/11 attacks, nor do they tell us if she was or was not murdered. They do speak to the character of a woman who was going through something, though, and based on what else they found, it seems like we could make an educated guess at what she was going through. But wait, there were more irrelevant facts the police dug up about Sneha. In her article in The Independent in 2021, Helen Elfer writes that the police report claimed, quote, Sneha was experiencing marital problems linked to the fact Sneha would often stay out all night without telling Ron, sometimes going home with women she met in lesbian bars, end quote. Gasp! Lesbian bars! It continues, quote, a police report says Sneha's brother John claimed to have walked in on her and his girlfriend having sex the month earlier, end quote. I'm no police officer, so can someone please explain how this piece of information is in any way relevant to finding a missing person? I guess it might be, but it feels less likely they were trying to find Sneha and more like they were trying to build a case against her being a hero and for her being a giant, cheating, drunk, lesbian bad girl. Especially considering neither Ron nor Sneha's brother John were ever suspected of any foul play in her disappearance. Remember, police decided early on that she must have died in the aftermath of the attacks. So unless they were trying to invent a narrative that Ron or John killed her because of these dalliances, I really don't know what the point of including all this in the police report was. Maybe they were trying to find evidence of victim fund fraud? But once the lesbian affairs are out of the bag, I suppose, it's hard to put them back in. In his New York Magazine piece, Mark Fass reports, quote, she favored the loungy midtown lesbian bar Julie's, the rocker dyke bar Henrietta Hudson's, and the divey gay rock club Meow Mix. According to the investigations, Sneha's indiscretions appeared to have reached a low point in the months prior to her disappearance. A police report says that her brother John walked in on her and his girlfriend, now the mother of his son, having sex. Her alleged struggles with depression, alcohol, and her sexuality spilled over into her new job as well, end quote. He continued to say that the medical center where Sneha worked after being dismissed by Cabrini had suspended her for failing to meet with her substance abuse counselor. But, stranger, in all of this character-damning information that the police investigation turned up, there does not appear, to my admittedly untrained eye, to be one single piece of evidence leading police or anyone else closer to knowing what actually happened to Sneha. The police seem to be saying, without saying, that Sneha was no angel, and so it's unlikely she died a hero, but rather was killed by her own poor choices. And by now, you probably know how I feel about the whole "they were no angel" line of accusation. And once again, I say, ¿por qué no los dos? Also, not for nothing, but a lot of straight women choose lesbian or gay bars because they just feel safer. Fun fact, you don't have to be gay to go to a gay bar, which is not to say all you straight people should go flocking to your nearest gay bar. I'm just saying. Anyway, the point is, Sneha Philip could have been someone who made poor choices and made the ultimate sacrifice by trying to help during arguably the worst attack on U.S. soil in modern history. Is it possible that Sneha went out to a lesbian bar and met someone dangerous and had a fatal tryst? Or that she was attacked on the street? Sure. Is it possible Sneha drank too much and fell into the river? I mean, doubtful. Someone probably would have found her body at some point. It's not like there's sharks in the East River. Is it possible Sneha was struggling with her sexuality and self-medicating, and that it was impacting her work and her marriage? Hell yes. But none of this is definitive. None of this is conclusive. All we really know from this investigation is that Sneha was having a really hard time, right up until the day before New York and the United States at large started having its own really hard time. And then she was gone. But to make matters even less clear, to muddy up the waters even more, there's this from New York Magazine. Quote, John claims that the missing persons report, which states that he told Richard Stark, the detective assigned to the case, that he walked in on his sister and his girlfriend having sexual relations, is simply untrue. A product of cops sitting around playing Mad Libs. He maintains that he never even spoke with Stark, who has since retired and could not be reached for comment. Ron also says the report is riddled with fabrications. The fight at the courthouse, for example, never took place, he says. Ron said, quote, "Either I'm a liar or they're lying, because I'm 100% positive about this," end quote. Wow, so the expose of Sneha as a troubled lesbian adulterer might not even be true? The police lied? I'm shocked. Wait, actually I am kind of shocked. What on earth could have been the purpose of these lies? Even if they were trying to uncover victims' compensation fund fraud, this fiction they created doesn't do the job. All it does is paint Sneha as a woman going through personal troubles, which, even if it was all true, as we've already established, doesn't erase the possibility that she also ran into the chaos to help. All it does is sully her reputation. The case that Sneha may have decided to run away from her problems or decided to end it all just wasn't built on a very strong foundation. The theory had already been debunked back during Gallant's investigation. Although the theory did get a boost when in 2012 someone sent an anonymous postcard to the Post Secrets Project, which read, quote, "Everyone who knew me before 9/11 thinks I'm dead," end quote. Some people believe Sneha wrote the postcard. It wasn't handwritten, and of course it's nearly impossible to verify one way or the other, but it's unlikely, especially given all the necessary items she left behind. It was nearly impossible to get anywhere inside the city after the attacks. I don't know how she would have pulled off getting far enough to disappear. My guess is, if the person who wrote that postcard was being truthful, they were someone who had just moved to New York City and had been looking for a way to sever ties with their past and happened upon the perfect opportunity. And some of the same things that negate the she ran away theory also negate the notion that Sneha harmed herself. A person who is going to die by their own hand doesn't usually buy 3 pairs of shoes and make plans to visit local nightclubs. Sneha's parents also objected strongly to this narrative. And honestly, even if the portrait of Sneha as a malcontent struggling with demons was a truer representation than the selfless altruism the 9/11 hero mythos put forth, why drag that up after her disappearance? Why disrupt her family's hard-won peace to tell a story that leads nowhere? Granted, there was no evidence placing Sneha at the 9/11 disaster site, but there was no evidence not placing her there. The police report's finding led a judge to take Sneha Philip off the 9/11 victims list in 2004. The reason given was, quote, "a lack of evidence proving her whereabouts on the morning of 11 September, end quote. Apparently, the judge saw fit to rehash the salacious findings in the police report. Again, no reason. Obviously, Sneha's family were crushed. Sneha's mother, Ansu Philip, knew her daughter to be, quote, "kind, compassionate, beautiful inside, beautiful outside," end quote. She and the rest of the family thought it was completely plausible and likely that Sneha went out on September 11th to help those in need. When we lose a loved one, we take comfort where we can get it. Sneha's mother told New York Magazine in 2006, quote, "It's more peaceful for me to think she died in the World Trade Center than I cannot bear to think somebody killed her," end quote. It was too much for Sneha's family to see her reputation sullied in the wake of her apparent death. It was too much to have their sense of closure ripped away. The family couldn't and wouldn't let go, and eventually, in 2008, an appeals court reversed the decision. Justice David Sachs wrote of the decision, quote, "Even without direct proof irrefutably establishing that her route that morning took her past the World Trade Center at the time of the attack, the evidence shows it to be highly probable that she died that morning and at that site, whereas only the rankest speculation leads to any other conclusion," end quote. Only the rankest speculation, I'll say. Sneha's name was ultimately included on the memorial, and her family could finally rest in the knowledge that the case was well and truly closed. But even as her name is carved in that stone, there will always be the sense that her story was not. Sneha's last days read like a choose-your-own-adventure book. Which path will we choose for her? What is her legacy? That's an easy one for me, stranger. In the wake of all the anguish of September 11th, I choose the road less ugly. Rest in peace, Sneha. Next time on Strange and Unexplained, legend has it there is a book whose whereabouts is only known to 2 people on Earth that contains all the secrets of our nation. Is it true? Is there really a President's Book of Secrets? And if so, what is in it? Strange and Unexplained is a production of Three Goose Entertainment with help from Grab Bag Collab. This episode was written by me and Eve Kerrigan with research by the Strange Research Squad. Editing help from Amber Hunt and sound engineering and mixing by Henry Lavoie. If you have an idea for an episode, head to our website, strangeandunexplainedpod.com, and fill out the contact form. I will write back. And don't forget to get your IRL tickets or your early bird virtual tickets to the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival for the weekend of July 12th in Denver. I'll be doing a brand new live show with comedy and a live episode taping. For more amazing content, join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab, where for just $5 a month you get all the Grab Bag exclusive shows, and for $8 you get all those plus Amber Hunt's Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. Grab Bag is an all-female and non-binary owned profit share network where our contributors get to keep ownership of their shows. We strive to give a platform to those who might not be able to land themselves on a bigger network. Who knows, maybe you have a podcast idea you'd like to pitch to Grab Bag. We've got live recordings, watch parties, book clubs, and more. Why, there's so much going on over at Grab Bag Collab, you'd wonder if we missed the memo on how capitalism works. Join me on Instagram at SNUPod, Daisy Egan, and Grab Bag Collab, or head to the Facebook page to join in the conversation. If you like the show, please visit a sponsor with our unique code, give us a quick review and 5 stars, subscribe and download, and tell a friend. If you don't like the show, it's free to keep your opinion to yourself. Stay strange.